Look, he's talking to them in the way he thinks he needs to talk to them.
Why can't you acknowledge that?
Because
that is something that no president
I don't take orders from you, number one, and number two, I gave him the space to negotiate with you.
Scott Jennings showed up again on Abby Phillip's panel, playing the same role he always does: dismissive, combative, and pushing narratives that don't hold up under scrutiny. The tone wasn't about honest debate. It was about posturing, deflection, and muddying the facts. We're going to break down the key moments from that exchange, and I'll walk you through exactly what stood out and why it matters. Let's dive in.
Tonight, a question about American values after President Trump warned that a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. He has since delayed that threat now for 2 weeks, but it still sent shockwaves all over the world, including the Vatican.
Today, as we all know, there was also this threat against all the people of Iran. This is truly unacceptable. There are certainly issues of international law here, but much more. It's a moral issue, for the good of the people entirely.
The Pope has been weighing in on this conflict for a while now, but I think you described it as a genocidal threat. Other people have described it that way. I mean, there's this debate always, should you take Trump literally or seriously? But whether you take him literally or seriously, saying that you're going to end a civilization is a serious threat that no American president has ever issued before.
And you shouldn't. And honestly, those sorts of things just really are very unhelpful. But I will also say we're not unaccustomed to him doing this. He did it with respect to North Korea. He said similar things with respect to China. He's made bluffs with respect to Canada. He's done it over and over again. And every time that he does this, I find that the media is running around chasing its tail with respect to him. I get he's the president of the United States. He should not be saying any of that sort of thing. And it's wrong. It is absolutely wrong. At the same time, how many times are we going to do this with this guy? I mean, why? I mean, why are we engaging?
You can blame the media, but it's also the
So the onus is on us to say, oh, well, we'll just ignore him because he's making statements like a mad king. So we just normalize it as, well, that's just Trump being Trump and move on. Is this someone that you would tell your kids that you should look up to this guy and believe what he says, with the president of the United States, or just, well, you can go around and say whatever you want and threaten to, annihilate civilizations and just, it's the media chasing its tail every time he says something like that.
In fact, I've said exactly the opposite to my kids. I have said exactly the opposite.
I'm glad.
Yes,
so why is the standard different for the president of the United States? You wouldn't let your kids get away with talking like that.
Because it's happened over and over and over again. Yes, and he wasn't. He is the president of the United States.
So isn't it the media's job to hold him accountable for it?
You have to actually deal with what you have. Right. And what we're dealing right now is with a president that, again, I take the view, and I know it's a minority view, what he has done with respect to Iran has been good for society. It's been good for the world. Hamas has been degraded. Hezbollah has been degraded. The Iranian military, the nuclear, it is an evil nation state. I look at the long game rather than a bunch of talking heads.
We're not, like I said, we're doing the service to Mad Kings. Mad Kings haven't said things like that since going back to Genghis Khan. True. This is not even unprecedented in modern times. It was unprecedented even in medieval times to say things like this. And what a president says matters. It's not enough to say, well, that's just Trump, and let's not chase our tails around this. We have politicians at this table. When politicians speak, what they say, the way they say it matters and ought to matter. When I was a child and came home and if I used a profanity, my parents didn't say, that's just Bobby being Bobby and we should go on with that. I got my punishment for that. And the president should not get a free pass. He's an 80-year-old man. He's a grown adult. He cannot be just simply brushed. This kind of behavior, this kind of language cannot simply be brushed away. A civilization, for crying out loud. We're not even allowed to say that about a town or a village. We're not supposed to use language like that. George Bush went to Iraq and he used very different language. The language, I covered that war. And it was not a war I was in support of, but I covered it as a journalist in Baghdad for 5 years. I distinctly remember George Bush saying, we come to Iraq with respect for your civilization, with respect for the faiths that are practiced here. There's a difference. Presidential language goes down in history.
Agreed.
And that's got to count for something, and we cannot simply brush this away like this.
Absolutely.
I mean, I don't have any respect for the government, for this regime, but I'll tell you, unhinged and unhelpful. That's the only way when you read something like that, and you say, how does this advance the ball forward? Mm-hmm. And also, there's only so many times you can cry wolf and say things like that are so extreme and crazy where people just blow you off, including other world leaders, and don't take you seriously. And I think the more this, yes, or desensitize it, you're right. And that's not a good thing. And by the way, a little language, I'm from Jersey, so a little's okay. Let's not get too clean.
I get how old you are.
I mean,
Before getting into Scott Jennings' usual deflections, I need to address something else first, because that argument we just heard doesn't hold up at all. Think about it this way. In any normal environment, corporate, professional, even basic day-to-day life, there are standards for behavior. If someone consistently spoke the way Donald Trump does in public, made the kinds of statements he makes, or communicated with that level of volatility, they wouldn't be tolerated. They'd be removed immediately. No company would keep an employee like that. No board would tolerate it from a CEO. And yet, in politics, we're told to just accept it, to shrug and say, that's just how he is, as if that somehow excuses everything. That logic wouldn't work with a child, and it certainly wouldn't work in any structured system that depends on accountability. So, the real question becomes, why is the standard suddenly lower when it comes to the highest office? At some point, this stopped being about ignorance and started becoming about willingness. Because there were multiple opportunities, years of them, to draw a line, to say this isn't acceptable, to reject the behavior outright. Instead, what happened was the opposite. The behavior was tolerated, defended, and eventually normalized. And once that line is gone, everything else follows. Statements that would have ended any other political career barely register anymore. What used to be disqualifying becomes background noise. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens because people allow it to happen. And here's the part that's predictable. When the political climate shifts, when the influence fades, many of the same voices defending it today will quietly distance themselves from it. The support you see now won't be permanent. It's conditional. And when the cost of association outweighs the benefit, the narrative will change just as quickly as it was built. That's the cycle.
Let me just read this, because this is conservative commentator Orrin Cass. He's close to Vice President J.D. Vance. He says, simply put, what is the point of all of this? If these are empty threats that we all know he will not carry out, then they are ineffective threats. The Iranians are on X too, and merely making the president and our nation look foolish. If they're not empty threats, and the president is asserting the American position that such actions are acceptable in this situation and ones that we are willing to take, we are not living in some quantum thought experiment where he is simultaneously is and is not serious.
I don't agree that he's made empty threats as it relates to Iran.
This is literally an empty threat.
I don't think the people that we decapitated at the top of their regime would call them empty threats either. I mean, we've clearly demonstrated the interest in using the U.S. military to take drastic action.
All of the shifting deadlines.
Right.
What do you call the threat this morning to end their civilization, only to accept a 10-point plan that was put on the table yesterday as the basis for negotiations?
You haven't seen the 10-point plan. All we know is that they said they would reopen the strait. Beyond that, we don't know anything.
Hold on a second. The president retweeted the Iranian foreign minister's statement, which said explicitly that they are using the 10-point plan as a basis of negotiation. I'm not making that up. The president reiterated that on an X post, Scott.
But I have a
so my point is the threats from Trump
and some of the stuff that's
to bomb their bridges, to bomb their desalination plants, to bomb them out of their civilization off the face of the earth. How are those not empty threats?
Well, it looks like it brought them to the table tonight and got them in a place where they would agree to a ceasefire. I mean, I'll give you a counter argument to all these other positions, which is
that is not connected to reality.
We have a ceasefire.
Tel Aviv is still under attack.
The same table that we have tonight is the table that existed yesterday, in large part. And fundamentally, the only thing that has been agreed to is that Iran will continue to control the Strait of Hormuz and will allow ships to go through on their control. That is the only thing that has been agreed to.
The strait is going to be reopened, and we're going to negotiate about the rest. Beyond that, we don't really know much of anything. But I will tell you, yesterday, Iran was saying, we're cutting off, talks. We're not going to continue the talks. The president uses some extreme language, and all of a sudden, voila, tonight, we have a ceasefire for 2 weeks. Why can't we just say, you know what? Maybe we have achieved military objectives. Maybe we have taken down their military and their ability to export terror. Maybe we have decimated their missiles. Maybe we've buried the nuclear material. And maybe we've got 2 weeks to make the world a safer place. Why can't we look at this as a glass half full moment as opposed to,
but then why
we have to make it negative for Donald Trump.
Why can't you just acknowledge that what Donald Trump said this morning was abhorrent and that no president should ever threaten annihilating a civilization? Why can't you just acknowledge that?
Look, he's talking to them in the way he thinks he needs to talk to them.
Why can't you acknowledge that? That is something that no president
I don't take orders from you, number one, and number two, I gave him the space to negotiate with the Iranians the best way he knows how.
All right, well, let me just ask a final question, Scott, for the record. Do you think it's acceptable for the president to threaten to annihilate a civilization?
I think it's acceptable for the commander-in-chief to deal with these people in the best way that he can.
Is that a yes
to
or is
get
it a no?
result.
Is
And I
that a
give him
yes
lat-
or
and I
is
give
it
him
a
the
no?
latitude to
So
do
that's a
it.
Is that a
yes.
yes
I'm
or
not
a
going to
no?
second guess him. I'm not going to second guess
So
him.
it's a yes?
He put out a statement. We now have a ceasefire.
Okay.
Those are the two things that
I just wanted to ask for the record.
Yes.
That's a yes on your part.
Yeah.
We'll leave it there.
Honestly, I don't think I'd last very long on a panel like that. Not because I couldn't make the argument, but because of the level of restraint it requires. Watching that exchange, you can tell some people are holding back far more than they're saying out loud. And yes, it's television, it's structured, it's performative, but even within that, there's a limit. What stood out most wasn't just the disagreement, it was the refusal to engage honestly. When someone is pressed with a direct question and still chooses to sidestep it, that tells you everything you need to know. And credit where it's due, the way that moment was handled, pinning it down to a clear answer, cut through all the noise. Now stepping back, this is exactly why I keep covering these kinds of discussions, because there is value in breaking them down, in looking at how arguments are made, and more importantly, how they fall apart under pressure. You don't have to agree with every perspective to recognize when someone is at least attempting to engage in good faith. And that's the contrast here. There are commentators I don't typically align with who, on certain issues, are still willing to draw a line and say, this goes too far. That matters. It shows a level of independence. But when every position bends in the same direction, when every argument leads back to the same defense no matter the context, it stops being analysis and starts becoming repetition. At that point, the conversation isn't moving forward, it's just reinforcing itself. And that's really the bigger takeaway from all of this. But I want to hear from you. Where do you stand on this debate? Drop your thoughts below, and if you found this breakdown useful, make sure to like and subscribe.